For most of your life, you've trusted that the water coming from your tap has been carefully evaluated by people whose job it is to protect you. That trust is reasonable. It's necessary. But every so often, something happens that invites us to look more closely at assumptions we've carried for decades. A recent federal court ruling has done exactly that, determining for the first time in more than 70 years that one of the most universal additions to public water supplies may pose risks that were never properly considered. The ruling doesn't change what flows from your tap today. What it does is open a door. It invites us to ask a question that becomes more important with each passing year. What have we been told is safe? And how do we really know? You are listening to the Longevity Library, where we archive the wisdom of healthy aging. The long view. Rethinking what we put into our bodies after 50. There is a question that becomes more interesting with each passing year. And it is this. What have we been told is safe? And how do we really know? Most of us have spent our lives trusting that the water coming from the tap, the air we breathe, the food on store shelves have all been carefully evaluated by people whose job it is to protect us. This trust is not unreasonable. It is, in fact, essential to modern life. We cannot all be experts in everything. But every so often, something happens that invites us to look more closely at assumptions we have carried for decades. A recent legal ruling has done exactly that regarding one of the most universal additions to public water supplies in the United States. For the first time in more than 70 years, a federal court has determined that the evidence supporting the safety of this practice is no longer sufficient, and that regulatory agencies must take a new look at what has been considered settled science. The ruling does not immediately change anything about the water that flows into homes across the country. What it does is open a door. It invites a conversation that has been quietly taking place in scientific circles for years, and it brings that conversation into the open where it belongs. For those who have passed the age of 50, this conversation carries particular weight, not because the risks are greater at this stage of life, though in some ways they may be, but because people in this decade and beyond have lived through enough cycles of scientific reversal to know that yesterday's certainty often becomes tomorrow's regret. We remember when lead was in paint and gasoline, when asbestos was a miracle material, when cigarettes were recommended by doctors. We have seen how long it can take for evidence to overcome institutional momentum. And we have learned that waiting for absolute proof before taking reasonable precautions is not always the wisest course. This is not a call to alarm. It is an invitation to understanding. The story of what has been added to water supplies, why it was added, and what we now know about its effects on the body is a window into something larger. It is a story about how public health decisions are made, how science evolves, and how individuals can navigate a world where certainty is often elusive. It is also a story about the remarkable complexity of the human body, and about how substances that seem harmless at one level can have subtle but meaningful effects over time. The body as a cumulative record. Every human body is a living archive. It records, in ways both visible and invisible, everything that has ever entered it. The air breathed in cities and countryside, the food grown in soils rich or depleted, the water consumed from taps or springs, all of it leaves traces. Some of these traces are temporary, processed and eliminated by the body's remarkable detoxification systems. Others accumulate, building up over decades in ways that were never anticipated when they first entered use. This cumulative reality is something that those who have lived long enough understand intuitively. The body at 60 is not simply the body at 30 with more wrinkles. It is the product of 30 additional years of exposure, adaptation, and wear. Bones that seemed solid in middle age may have been slowly incorporating minerals from water and food, changing their very composition in ways that affect their strength and function. Organs that once processed toxins efficiently may now be working with reduced capacity. Systems that once maintained precise chemical balances may have drifted imperceptibly over time. The concept of dose has always been central to toxicology, and it is central to this story as well. The same substance that is harmless or even beneficial at one level can become problematic at another. The difficulty lies in determining where those thresholds lie, and in recognizing that they may be different for different people at different stages of life. A level that poses no measurable risk to a healthy adult might be entirely inappropriate for a developing fetus, a nursing infant, or an older person with compromised kidney function. This is why the recent legal ruling focused so specifically on vulnerable populations. The developing brain, whether in utero or in early childhood, has vulnerabilities that the adult brain does not. The connections being formed during those critical windows, the migration of neurons to their proper places, the establishment of the neural architecture that will support learning and memory for a lifetime. All of these processes can be disrupted by substances that would have no noticeable effect on a mature brain. Protecting these processes is not about preventing immediate illness. It is about preserving potential, about ensuring that every child has the fullest possible opportunity to develop their cognitive capacities. For those past 50, the relevance of this may not be immediately obvious, but consider the grandparents who prepare formula for an infant, the parents who make decisions about what their children consume, the community members who vote on local water policies. The choices made today about what goes into public water supplies will affect generations to come. Understanding the evidence behind those choices is not just a matter of personal protection. It is a matter of stewardship. The origins of a public health practice. To understand how we arrived at the current situation, it helps to go back to the beginning. The practice of adding substances to public water supplies did not emerge from rigorous clinical trials or comprehensive safety testing. It emerged from observation. From a single town in Colorado where children's teeth looked different and seemed to decay less frequently than in neighboring communities. What was observed in that town was a condition called dental fluorosis, white or brown spots on teeth caused by exposure to naturally high levels of fluoride in the local water. Along with these cosmetic changes came an apparent reduction in cavities. From this observation, a hypothesis was born that fluoride, despite causing visible changes to teeth, might also protect them from decay. The leap from observation to public policy happened quickly, at least by scientific standards, without the kind of controlled studies that would be required today for any new medical intervention. Communities began adding fluoride to their water supplies. The practice spread across the United States until it became the norm rather than the exception. Today, America stands out among developed nations for the extent of its water fluoridation. Most European countries never adopted the practice on a wide scale, relying instead on other approaches to dental health. What is striking about this history is not that it happened. Public health has always involved a degree of pragmatism, of acting on the best available evidence even when that evidence is incomplete. What is striking is how quickly the practice became entrenched, how vigorously it has been defended ever since, and how little scrutiny it received for decades after its adoption. The assumption of safety became so deeply embedded that questioning it was treated not as scientific skepticism, but as a form of deviance. Only in recent years has that begun to change. The accumulation of studies from around the world, the development of more sophisticated methods for measuring neurological effects, and the growing awareness of how environmental exposures can affect health across the lifespan have all contributed to a reconsideration. The recent court ruling is not the beginning of this reconsideration. It is a milestone along a path that has been under construction for years. What the science actually shows. When researchers began looking systematically at the effects of fluoride on neurological development, They found something that should have been looked for decades earlier. Studies from China, Iran, Mexico, and Canada, among other countries, have consistently found associations between higher fluoride exposure and lower measures of cognitive function in children. The consistency of these findings across different populations and different research methods is what epidemiologists call a pattern, and patterns demand explanation. The mechanisms that might explain this association have also been studied. Research has identified multiple pathways through which fluoride can affect the developing brain. It can cause inflammation in neural tissue, triggering immune responses that disrupt normal development. It can affect the mitochondria that power brain cells, making them smaller and less efficient. It can interfere with the formation of synapses, the connections between neurons that are the physical basis of learning and memory. None of this means that fluoride at the levels found in public water supplies is causing obvious brain damage in every exposed child. The effects being measured are subtle. Statistical shifts in population averages, not dramatic declines visible in every individual. But subtle effects matter when they are applied to entire populations. A small downward shift in average IQ, distributed across millions of children, means more children at the lower end of the cognitive spectrum and fewer at the higher end. It means lost potential, difficult to measure in any individual, but meaningful at the level of society. The debate in the recent court case was not about whether fluoride could cause such effects. Both sides ultimately agreed that it could. The debate was about dose. At what level of exposure do these effects become measurable? Is the level found in public water supplies, by itself, sufficient to cause concern? Or does it only become problematic when combined with other sources? This is where the cumulative nature of exposure becomes critical. Public water contains fluoride at a concentration of about 0.7 parts per million. But no one drinks only public water. They drink tea, which can contain much higher concentrations because tea plants accumulate fluoride from soil. They consume processed foods and beverages made with fluoridated water. Infants consume formula mixed with fluoridated water, receiving a dose per body weight that far exceeds what an adult would get. Pregnant women pass fluoride to their developing fetuses, and the levels measured in maternal urine can be several times higher than the concentration in water alone. When all of these sources are added together, total exposure can be substantially higher than the level in tap water would suggest. The court recognized this, determining that the evidence of cumulative risk was sufficient to require regulatory action. It was not necessary to prove that water alone caused harm. It was enough to show that total exposure, in real-world conditions, creates an unreasonable risk to neurological health. How the body handles what it cannot use. The human body has remarkable systems for processing the substances it takes in. The liver can transform toxic compounds into harmless ones. The kidneys can filter waste from the blood and excrete it in urine. The digestive tract can bind some substances and prevent their absorption altogether. But these systems have limits, and some substances are more difficult to manage than others. Fluoride is one of those substances. It is highly reactive, which means it readily combines with other elements in the body. When it encounters calcium, it forms a compound called fluorapatite. This is different from the hydroxyapatite that normally makes up bones and teeth. Hydroxyapatite is the body's preferred form, the one it has evolved to use and manage. Fluorapatite is harder, more resistant to breakdown, but also different in ways that matter. The body uses bones as a reservoir for calcium. When dietary calcium is insufficient, hormones signal the bones to release some of their stored calcium into the bloodstream. This is a normal, essential process that maintains the precise calcium levels required for nerve function, muscle contraction, and countless other processes. But if bones have incorporated significant amounts of fluorapatite, They may be more resistant to this normal breakdown. The body cannot access its calcium reserves as easily, potentially leading to deficiencies even when total bone mass appears adequate. This is not a concern that would show up in short-term studies. It is a concern about cumulative effects over decades, about the gradual incorporation of a foreign substance into the very structure of the skeleton. It is the kind of concern that only becomes apparent when researchers look at populations with long-term exposure, or when older adults begin to experience problems with calcium metabolism that are not explained by other factors. The thyroid gland may also be affected by fluoride. The thyroid requires iodine to produce its hormones, and fluoride competes with iodine for absorption and utilization. In populations with adequate iodine intake, this competition may not matter. But many Americans have marginal iodine status, and the added burden of fluoride could theoretically contribute to thyroid dysfunction. Again, this is not a dramatic effect that would be obvious in every exposed person. It is a subtle shift in risk, a small increase in the likelihood of problems that may have multiple causes. The difference between topical and systemic exposure. One of the most important distinctions in this entire discussion is the difference between putting something on teeth and swallowing it. This distinction has been consistently blurred in public messaging about fluoride, with the result that many people do not realize how different the two routes of exposure are. Applied to teeth, fluoride can have genuine benefits. It can help remineralize early enamel damage, making teeth more resistant to acid attack. This is why fluoride in toothpaste can be useful. It is applied directly where it is needed, and the vast majority is spit out. Some is inevitably swallowed, and some is absorbed through the oral mucosa. But the total dose is much lower than what would be consumed by drinking fluoridated water throughout the day. Systemic exposure, through swallowing, is a different matter entirely. When fluoride is ingested, it enters the bloodstream and circulates throughout the body. It reaches every organ, every tissue, every cell. It crosses the placenta and reaches developing fetuses. It enters the brain, where it can affect neural function. It incorporates into bones, changing their composition. It affects the thyroid and other glands. The benefits of systemic exposure, if they exist at all, are indirect. The theory has been that fluoride incorporated into developing teeth makes them more resistant to decay later in life. But this theory has never been strongly supported by evidence. Comparisons between fluoridated and non-fluoridated communities show similar rates of tooth decay, suggesting that the benefits of fluoride, to the extent they exist, come primarily from topical application rather than ingestion. This is why many experts who are concerned about fluoride in water do not oppose its use in toothpaste. The two are fundamentally different in terms of dose, route of exposure, and risk-benefit calculation. It is possible to acknowledge that fluoride has legitimate dental applications while questioning whether adding it to the entire water supply, where it cannot be avoided and where it affects every system of the body, is a wise public health practice. The vulnerability of the developing brain. The brain undergoes its most dramatic development in the first years of life. Neurons are being formed, migrating to their proper locations, and establishing the connections that will support all future learning. This process is exquisitely sensitive to disruption. Substances that would have no effect on a mature brain can alter development in ways that last a lifetime. The research on fluoride and neurological development has focused primarily on this window of vulnerability. Studies have measured fluoride levels in pregnant women and then followed their children, testing cognitive function at various ages. The consistent finding has been that higher prenatal exposure is associated with lower scores on tests of intelligence and cognitive ability. This association does not prove causation in the strict sense. It is possible that other factors explain the relationship. that women with higher fluoride exposure differ in other ways that affect their children's development. But researchers have controlled for many of these potential confounding factors, and the association has held up across different populations and different study designs. The pattern is strong enough that the National Toxicology Program, a government agency, has concluded with moderate to high confidence that fluoride is a developmental neurotoxicant. What does this mean in practical terms? It means that fluoride, at the levels many pregnant women are exposed to, can affect how their children's brains develop. It does not mean that every exposed child will have noticeable problems. The effects are statistical, shifts in the distribution of cognitive abilities across populations. But statistical effects matter. A small shift in average IQ means more children at the lower end of the spectrum, fewer at the higher end. It means that some children who might have been able to compensate for other challenges are now less able to do so. For those past 50, this research may seem distant. But consider the grandchildren, the great-nieces and great-nephews, the children in your community. The choices made today about water quality will affect them. Understanding the evidence is the first step toward making informed decisions about what should and should not be added to the water everyone drinks. Cumulative exposures and the limits of regulation. Regulatory agencies typically evaluate substances one at a time. They set safety standards for each chemical based on studies that look at that chemical alone. This approach has a certain logic, but it does not reflect the reality of human exposure. In the real world, people are exposed to hundreds or thousands of chemicals simultaneously, and these chemicals can interact in ways that are not captured by single substance studies. The fluoride in water is just one of many substances that enter the body over a lifetime. There are pesticides on food, phthalates in plastics, PFAS in non-stick coatings, flame retardants in furniture, heavy metals in air pollution. Each of these has its own effects, its own mechanisms of action, its own capacity to disrupt normal biological processes. When they occur together, their effects can add up or even multiply. This is what makes the recent court ruling potentially significant beyond the specific case of fluoride. The Toxic Substances Control Act, under which the lawsuit was brought, allows citizens to sue the Environmental Protection Agency to compel action on hazardous substances. This case was the first successful use of that provision. If it opens the door to more such lawsuits, it could create a mechanism for holding regulators accountable for considering cumulative risks rather than evaluating each chemical in isolation. For individuals, the implication is that relying solely on government regulation to ensure safety may not be sufficient. The regulatory system was designed for a different era, when chemicals were fewer and the science of toxicology was less developed. Today, with thousands of chemicals in commerce and new ones being introduced regularly, the system cannot keep up. Personal awareness and personal action become necessary complements to regulation. What it means to filter water. For those who have decided that reducing fluoride exposure is prudent, water filtration is the most direct and effective step. But not all filters remove fluoride, and understanding the options is essential. The most effective technology for fluoride removal is reverse osmosis. These systems force water through a semi-permeable membrane that blocks fluoride molecules along with many other contaminants. Reverse osmosis systems install under the sink and connect to a dedicated faucet. They require periodic filter changes and waste some water in the process, but they are highly effective, typically removing more than 90% of fluoride. Distillation is another option. This process involves boiling water and collecting the steam, which condenses into pure water. Distillation removes fluoride completely, along with virtually everything else. The resulting water is essentially pure, which is why many people who use distillation add minerals back before drinking. Prolonged consumption of mineral-free water may not be ideal, as the body does derive some minerals from drinking water. For those who prefer a simpler option, tabletop filters designed specifically for fluoride removal are available. These units sit on the counter and filter water as it is poured, requiring no installation. They are less expensive than reverse osmosis systems and easier to use when traveling. The key is to choose a filter that explicitly states it removes fluoride, as standard carbon filters do not. Bottled water requires careful evaluation. Many bottled waters are simply tap water from the source city, filtered to varying degrees. Unless the label specifies that fluoride has been removed, it is likely present. Spring waters vary in their natural fluoride content depending on the source. The only way to know for certain is to contact the manufacturer or look for independent test results. For those who filter their water, adding minerals back is worth considering. Trace mineral drops are available that can be added to drinking water, providing the electrolytes and minerals that filtered water lacks. This is particularly important for those who use distillation or reverse osmosis, as these methods remove minerals along with contaminants. The question of tea. Tea presents a special case in the fluoride discussion because tea plants are natural accumulators of fluoride. They draw it from soil and water, concentrating it in their leaves. When those leaves are brewed, fluoride is extracted into the beverage. The amount of fluoride in tea varies widely depending on where it was grown, the age of the leaves, and how it is processed. Older leaves tend to have higher concentrations, which is why some cheaper teas, made from older leaves, can have very high fluoride levels. Brewing time also matters. Longer steeping extracts more fluoride. For regular tea drinkers, the cumulative fluoride exposure from tea can be substantial. Someone who drinks several cups daily, prepared with fluoridated water, may be consuming fluoride levels that approach or exceed what would be considered safe by any reasonable standard. This does not mean tea drinkers should necessarily stop drinking tea. It means they might consider the source of their tea, how it is brewed, and what water is used. Choosing high-quality teas from reputable sources, brewing with filtered water, and limiting steeping time can all reduce fluoride exposure while preserving the enjoyment of tea. For those who are particularly concerned, switching to other beverages or drinking tea less frequently are options. Infant formula and the youngest among us. The most vulnerable population for fluoride exposure may be infants who are fed formula. Infant formula already contains some fluoride from the manufacturing process. When it is mixed with fluoridated water, the final concentration can be many times higher than what would be considered safe on a body weight basis. Infants have small bodies and developing brains. Their kidneys are immature and cannot excrete fluoride as efficiently as adult kidneys. Their blood-brain barrier is not fully formed, allowing substances to enter the brain more easily. Their neurons are in the process of forming connections that will last a lifetime. Exposing them to high fluoride levels during this critical window is exactly the kind of risk that the precautionary principle would suggest avoiding. For parents and grandparents, the solution is simple. Use fluoride-free water for mixing formula. This can be purchased bottled water labeled as purified or distilled, or it can be tap water that has been filtered to remove fluoride. The small effort involved is trivial compared to the potential importance of protecting an infant's developing brain. Breastfeeding mothers should also be aware that fluoride passes into breast milk. Drinking fluoride-free water while nursing reduces the fluoride exposure of the infant. This is another example of how personal choices can protect those who are most vulnerable, even when broader policies have not yet changed. Dental products and professional treatments. Toothpaste and professional dental treatments represent concentrated sources of fluoride exposure that many people do not think about. The concentration of fluoride in toothpaste is typically 1,000 to 1,500 parts per million, more than 1,000 times higher than the concentration in fluoridated water. Professional fluoride varnishes are even more concentrated, around 24,000 parts per million. While toothpaste is intended to be spit out, some is inevitably swallowed, especially by young children who have not yet learned to rinse and spit reliably. Even for adults, some absorption occurs through the oral mucosa, the lining of the mouth. This is not a trivial amount. Studies have shown that fluoride from toothpaste enters the bloodstream within minutes of application. For those who want to avoid fluoride exposure while still supporting dental health, alternatives exist. Toothpastes containing hydroxyapatite, the natural mineral that makes up tooth enamel, have been used for decades in Japan and are increasingly available in other countries. Hydroxyapatite works through biomimicry, supplying the same mineral that teeth are made of to support remineralization. It does not carry the toxicity concerns of fluoride and can be swallowed safely. Professional fluoride treatments can be declined while still receiving regular cleanings and examinations. Many dentists will honor a request to skip fluoride when patients explain their concerns. For those who feel uncomfortable declining entirely, asking about hydroxyapatite varnishes, which are becoming available in some practices, is another option. The key is to recognize that dental health and overall health are connected. Supporting teeth through good nutrition, proper oral hygiene, and regular professional care does not require accepting exposures that may affect other systems of the body. It is possible to have healthy teeth without ingesting substances that raise concerns about neurological development, bone health, or thyroid function. Diet and the real causes of tooth decay. The entire rationale for water fluoridation rests on an assumption that fluoride is the primary determinant of cavity rates. This assumption has always been questionable, and it becomes more so with each passing year of research. Tooth decay is fundamentally a metabolic disease. It occurs when fermentable carbohydrates, particularly sugars, are consumed frequently. Oral bacteria metabolize these sugars and produce acid. The acid demineralizes tooth enamel, and if the process continues without interruption, cavities form. The frequency of sugar exposure matters more than the total amount consumed, which is why sipping sugary drinks throughout the day is more damaging than eating a dessert at a single sitting. Populations throughout human history, consuming traditional diets without any fluoride, had low rates of tooth decay. The dramatic increase in cavities over the past century parallels the rise in sugar consumption, not changes in fluoride availability. When researchers compare decay rates between fluoridated and non-fluoridated communities, they find similar rates. When they compare countries that fluoridate their water with those that do not, they find similar rates. This does not mean fluoride has no effect on teeth. Topical application can help remineralize early damage and make enamel more resistant to acid. But the idea that ingesting fluoride is necessary for dental health, or that it can compensate for a poor diet, is not supported by evidence. The implications for individuals are straightforward. Reducing sugar consumption, especially between meals, is the most effective thing anyone can do to prevent cavities. Choosing whole foods over processed ones, drinking water instead of sugary beverages, and limiting snacking all support dental health. Good oral hygiene, including brushing and flossing, removes the plaque where bacteria thrive. Regular dental care catches problems early, before they become severe. These strategies work regardless of fluoride exposure. They address the root causes of decay rather than attempting to compensate for them. And they have the advantage of supporting overall health, not just dental health. Since the same dietary patterns that cause cavities also contribute to obesity, diabetes, and other chronic conditions. The mineral economy of the body. Teeth and bones are often thought of as static structures, hard and unchanging. In reality, they are dynamic tissues, constantly exchanging minerals with the rest of the body. Calcium moves in and out of bones in response to hormonal signals. Phosphate is deposited and withdrawn as needed. This constant flux is essential for maintaining the precise mineral balance that every cell requires. Saliva plays a critical role in this process for teeth. It contains calcium and phosphate ions that can deposit into early enamel lesions, repairing damage before cavities form. This natural remineralization depends on adequate mineral concentrations in saliva, which in turn depend on overall mineral status. When the body is deficient in calcium or phosphate, saliva reflects that deficiency, and teeth become more vulnerable to decay. Fluoride alters this natural process. It combines with calcium to form fluorapatite, a different crystal structure that is more resistant to acid but also more brittle and less like the body's native tissues. When fluoride is present during remineralization, it gets incorporated into the tooth structure, changing its composition. Whether this is beneficial or harmful depends on one's perspective. It makes teeth harder, but it also makes them different. The broader mineral economy of the body extends far beyond teeth. Calcium is essential for muscle contraction, nerve transmission, blood clotting, and countless enzymatic reactions. Phosphate is involved in energy metabolism, cell signaling, and bone structure. Magnesium, another mineral often deficient in modern diets, is required for proper calcium utilization. Supporting overall mineral status through diet supports all of these processes. For those who filter their water, adding minerals back is worth considering. Trace mineral drops are available that can be added to drinking water, providing a broad spectrum of minerals and forms the body can use. Eating a diet rich in whole foods, including leafy greens, bone broths, and properly prepared grains, also supports mineral status. The goal is not to achieve perfect mineral balance through supplementation alone, but to create conditions in which the body's natural regulatory systems can function optimally. What the court ruling really means. The recent federal court ruling ordering the EPA to revisit fluoride standards is a legal decision, not a scientific one, but it is a decision based on science, on 7 years of testimony from experts on both sides, on the accumulation of studies that have been published over decades. The judge did not invent new evidence. He evaluated the evidence that already existed and found it compelling. The ruling does not ban fluoride from water supplies. It does not require municipalities to stop fluoridating. It simply requires the EPA to reconsider its standards, to take a new look at the science and determine whether current levels are truly safe. The agency may appeal. It may conduct a review that produces minimal changes. It may drag its feet for years. But the ruling creates pressure, and pressure matters. For municipalities, the ruling provides cover for those who have wanted to reconsider fluoridation but faced opposition from entrenched interests. Local officials can now point to a federal court and say that the science is not as settled as they once believed. At least one town in New York has already voted to stop fluoridation in response to the ruling. Others may follow. For professional organizations that have long defended fluoridation, the ruling creates a credibility problem. When a federal court determines that an unreasonable risk exists, it becomes harder to dismiss concerns as unfounded. The American Dental Association and other groups may continue to defend the practice, but their defenses will now have to contend with the court's finding. For individuals, the ruling validates concerns that were once dismissed as fringe. Those who chose to filter their water or avoid fluoride products can feel confident that their decisions were based on reasonable interpretation of available evidence. Those who have not yet taken action now have additional reason to consider doing so. Why institutions resist change. Understanding why organizations like the American Dental Association continue to defend water fluoridation despite mounting evidence of harm requires looking beyond the science. Institutions have their own dynamics, their own incentives, their own reasons for maintaining positions long after those positions have become questionable. One factor is simple inertia. These organizations have promoted fluoride for decades, building their public health messaging and professional identity around its supposed benefits. Admitting error would require acknowledging that millions of people were exposed to potential harm based on incomplete science. It would require retracting statements, revising guidelines, and explaining to members and the public why they were wrong. This is not impossible, but it is difficult, and it is resisted. Another factor is professional identity. Scientists and policymakers who built their careers on fluoride research have personal and professional stakes in defending their life's work. To acknowledge that the substance they have studied and promoted may be causing harm is to acknowledge that they may have been part of the problem. This is psychologically difficult, and it leads to defensive reactions. Financial factors also play a role. The phosphate fertilizer industry produces fluoride as a byproduct and has historically supplied it to water systems, turning a waste product into a revenue stream. Professional organizations receive funding from various sources, some with interests in maintaining the status quo. These relationships do not necessarily determine positions, but they create environments in which questioning the consensus is discouraged. Tribalism is perhaps the most powerful factor. When fluoride becomes an identity marker, when those who question it are dismissed as conspiracy theorists or anti-science, rational evaluation of evidence becomes difficult. Professionals who might privately acknowledge concerns find it easier to maintain public solidarity with their colleagues than to risk ostracism by speaking out. The social costs of dissent are high, and most people prefer to avoid them. None of this means that the organizations defending fluoride are evil or corrupt. It means they are human, subject to the same psychological and social forces that affect all human institutions. Understanding these forces helps explain why scientific consensus can persist long after the evidence has shifted, and why change often comes only when external pressure, like a court ruling, forces the issue. The precautionary principle in personal decision-making. The precautionary principle holds that when an activity raises threats of harm to human health or the environment, precautionary measures should be taken even if some cause and effect relationships are not fully established scientifically. This principle is controversial in regulatory contexts, where it can be used to block activities that might have benefits. But as a guide for personal decision-making, it has much to recommend it. Applying the precautionary principle to fluoride means asking a simple question. Given what is now known about potential neurological effects, especially in developing brains, is it reasonable to continue consuming fluoridated water when alternatives exist? For many people, the answer is no. Filtering water is easy and inexpensive. The potential benefits of continued exposure are, at best, marginal. The potential harms, while uncertain, are serious. The precautionary choice is to reduce exposure. This does not require believing that fluoride is definitely causing harm. It only requires acknowledging that the evidence of possible harm is strong enough to warrant action, and that the action itself is simple and low cost. This is the same logic that leads people to wear seatbelts even though most trips do not end in accidents, or to buy insurance even though most policies never pay out. It is a way of managing risk in an uncertain world. For those past 50, this logic applies not only to personal exposure, but to exposure of those they care about. Grandchildren, nieces and nephews, the children of friends, all of them are developing brains that will shape their entire lives. Helping to protect those brains, in whatever small ways are available, is a gift that costs little and may mean much. Creating a coherent approach to environmental health. Fluoride is one piece of a larger puzzle. The same logic that applies to it applies to many other environmental exposures. PFAS in nonstick coatings and waterproof fabrics, phthalates in plastics, bisphenol in food containers, pesticides on conventionally grown produce. All of these are substances that were introduced without adequate safety testing and are now being found to have effects that were not anticipated. A coherent approach to environmental health does not require eliminating all exposures. That is impossible. It requires awareness, prioritization, and reasonable action. Some exposures are easier to reduce than others. Some are more concerning than others. Some have alternatives that are readily available and affordable. For fluoride, the action is clear. Filter drinking water, especially for infants and pregnant women. Choose fluoride-free toothpaste. Decline professional fluoride treatments. Be aware of other sources, like tea, and make informed choices about them. For other substances, similar approaches exist. Choosing fresh or frozen foods over canned reduces exposure to bisphenol. Storing food in glass rather than plastic reduces exposure to phthalates. Choosing organic for produce known to have high pesticide residues reduces exposure to agricultural chemicals. Ventilating homes well reduces exposure to indoor air pollutants. None of these actions need to be taken to perfection. The goal is not to live in a bubble, free of all contaminants. The goal is to reduce total burden, to give the body's natural detoxification systems less work to do, to stack the odds in favor of health rather than against it. Small reductions across multiple exposures add up over time, just as small increases add up in the opposite direction. The body's remarkable capacity for adaptation. For all the concern about environmental exposures, it is worth remembering that the human body is remarkably resilient. It has systems for detecting toxins, neutralizing them, and eliminating them. It has repair mechanisms that can fix damage before it becomes permanent. It has regulatory systems that maintain balance across a wide range of conditions. This resilience is not unlimited, but it is substantial. The body can handle many challenges, especially when it is supported by good nutrition, adequate sleep, regular movement, and meaningful social connection. These foundations of health matter more than any single exposure, because they determine how well the body can cope with everything it encounters. This is why a focus on fundamentals is so important. Eating a diet rich in whole foods provides the nutrients the body needs for detoxification. Getting enough sleep allows repair processes to operate at full capacity. Regular movement supports circulation and lymphatic flow, helping to move toxins out of tissues. Social connection reduces stress, which otherwise impairs every system of the body. When these fundamentals are in place, the body can handle a remarkable amount of environmental challenge. When they are neglected, even small exposures can become problematic. This is not an argument for ignoring environmental toxins. It is an argument for addressing health comprehensively, supporting the body's natural capacities while also reducing unnecessary burdens. For those past 50, this comprehensive approach is particularly important. The body's resilience does decline with age, but it can be supported. Good nutrition becomes more important, not less. Sleep becomes more restorative when it is prioritized. Movement becomes essential for maintaining function. Social connection becomes a buffer against the stresses that accumulate over a lifetime. These are not guarantees of perfect health, but they are the best foundation available. A final perspective. The story of fluoride in public water supplies is not a simple story of good versus evil, of heroes and villains. It is a story of how public health decisions are made, how science evolves, and how individuals navigate a world where certainty is often elusive. It is a story about the gap between what we assume and what we know, and about the difficulty of changing course once assumptions have become entrenched. For those who have lived long enough to see multiple cycles of scientific reversal, this story has a familiar shape. It is the shape of lead in gasoline. of asbestos in buildings, of cigarettes recommended by doctors. It is the shape of substances introduced with good intentions and inadequate testing, defended long after evidence of harm emerged, and finally reconsidered when the weight of evidence became impossible to ignore. This pattern does not mean that all public health decisions are wrong, or that no one can be trusted. It means that humility is appropriate, that skepticism has its place, and that individuals must ultimately take responsibility for their own health. The regulatory system can only do so much. The rest is up to us. For those who choose to act on the current evidence, the path is clear. Filter water, especially for those who are most vulnerable. Choose dental products that support health without introducing concerns. Be aware of other sources of exposure and make informed choices about them. Support the body's natural capacities through good nutrition, adequate sleep, regular movement, and meaningful connection. These actions are not about fear. They are about prudence. They are about recognizing that the body is a cumulative record, that what goes in over decades matters, and that small choices today can have large effects over time. They are about taking the long view, the view that becomes more natural as the years pass and the horizon of one's own life comes into clearer focus. The water that flows from the tap has been a source of trust for generations. That trust may now need to be reconsidered, not because anyone was deliberately misled, but because the evidence has changed. Science evolves. Understanding deepens. What seemed certain yesterday becomes questionable today. This is not a failure of science. It is how science works. For those who can accept this uncertainty, who can hold multiple possibilities in mind without needing absolute answers, the path forward is clear. It is a path of informed choice, of reasonable precaution, of attention to the fundamentals that support health regardless of what the next study may show. It is a path that leads not to certainty, but to confidence, confidence that whatever challenges arise, the choices made were thoughtful, the actions taken were reasonable, and the body was supported as well as it could be. This is the long view. It is the view that becomes available after 50, when the arc of a lifetime becomes visible and the importance of small, consistent choices becomes clear. It is the view that allows for calm in the face of uncertainty, for action without alarm, for wisdom without fear. And it is the view that will serve well, whatever the water contains. The story of what has been added to public water supplies is not a simple story of good versus evil. It is a story about how public health decisions are made, how science evolves, and how each of us must ultimately take responsibility for what enters our own bodies. The water that flows from the tap has been a source of trust for generations. That trust may now need to be reconsidered, not because anyone was deliberately misled, but because the evidence has changed. For those who can accept this uncertainty, who can hold multiple possibilities in mind without needing absolute answers, the path forward is clear. It is a path of informed choice, of reasonable precaution, of attention to the fundamentals that support health regardless of what the next study may show. If this conversation has sparked questions or reflections of your own, we invite you to share them in the comments. And if you would like to continue exploring the wisdom of healthy aging, we invite you to subscribe so that new additions to the library find their way to you. This is the Longevity Library. Listen, learn, and live longer.